So I hope you're reading Keith Hopkins' discussion of gladiators at Rome. This slideshow presentation is based a lot on the writings that he has there, and so I hope that you have read his work before you come to this. I think this will make a lot more sense if you've done so. So we're moving, as you know, to ancient Rome and Italy and looking at one of these great public entertainments, namely the gladiator games at the Colosseum, to try to get some understanding of the role of art and entertainment in the Roman setting now. So we've seen, I think, in the past a map of Italy, but here you are, Rome here in the Italian peninsula. And our aims today in this slide presentation are to think about several things, again, that Keith Hopkins brings up, but mostly what are the origins of these contests? What are the origins of the gladiator games? Who were these gladiators? What does the history of the gladiators tell us about the history of Rome? And what might such an analysis tell us about ourselves? People often suggest that the Romans and the Americans are very similar in a lot of ways. Perhaps this is one way to put that theory to the test. So the origins of the gladiator contests. Most likely, the origins are religious. If you've had the chance to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you know that in the Iliad, when Achilles' good friend Patroclus passes away, when he dies, Achilles puts on a celebration, a great funeral for his friend, but he also celebrates the passing of his life with athletic competitions. And it is in these athletic competitions that we find the origins of the Olympic Games. So it may be that in the Roman world, the origins of the contests, these athletic contests, are somehow religious in nature. We have a very early example from 264 BC of Junius Brutus Pera and his brother who staged a funerary match in honor of their father. They had 3 pairs of gladiators who fought to the death. So celebrating the passing of life with death, with a death match. Some of my students have suggested that perhaps this has something to do with human sacrifice. And perhaps it does. We don't believe that the Romans practiced human sacrifice with any kind of regularity, though the gladiator games do make us wonder if indeed the Romans did practice human sacrifice of a sort at some point in their past. We also have the example of Julius Caesar. This is getting a little closer in time to when we have more information about gladiators, but Julius Caesar in the 1st century BC in 65 celebrated his own father who had died many years before and put up 320 pairs of gladiators who were to fight. He also forced condemned criminals to fight animals, wild animals, keeping in mind that at this point the Roman Empire covers the Mediterranean, and that includes the coastal areas of Africa, Asia, Europe, and in that process we find the Romans bringing in exotic animals to show to the Roman people, look at these amazing animals that are out there in the world that you don't normally see in Italy. Here we are, we're going to bring them to you. And Caesar forced condemned criminals to fight these animals. Typically the criminals had no weapons, and so this was a very rough kind of death for sure if you're fighting lions or rhinoceros or something of that effect. He also celebrated in 46 BC his victories in Gaul and in Egypt. And he also put on a celebration not only for his military victories, and we've been talking about the connection to military that the gladiator games have, but also to commemorate his daughter who had passed away in childbirth. And in this case, in 46 BC, he had mock combat of infantrymen, so putting on staged battles. He used cavalry and also elephants in the event. So for Julius Caesar, he's putting on these spectacles, and these are open to the public. These are very large indeed, and they are seeming to celebrate the death, the passing of important people in his life, his father, his daughter, but also to celebrate military victories. So bringing together some religious and military issues in these mock combats, in these entertainment bouts. This brings us to this concept of the gladiator games being somehow private for the celebration of an individual family member to a public event. In 42 BC, the city of Rome itself puts on gladiator games. And that's the first time we see a public event of this sort. It came to be the obligation of politicians to put on great spectacles to commemorate the Roman state, events in history, but also to celebrate the people of Rome. This could be in religious celebrations, theatrical celebrations, athletic competitions. This can be very expensive, and it's up to the individual politicians to foot most of the bill for this. So if you want to rise up in Roman politicians, if you want to gain notoriety, if you want to be noticed at the voting booth, you had to be remembered, memorable, remarkable in the kinds of celebrations that you threw for the benefit of the people. I hope you've seen the video at Khan Academy that attempts to show you the nature of Rome, the Roman city, in the 4th century AD. It's a phenomenal recreation and digitized recreation. This is an actual model that you can find. I believe this is at the Victor Emmanuel Museum, that memorial and museum there. But it is a model of someone has crafted, put together by hand. It is actual real model. It's not digitized. But you can see here, of course, the Colosseum and what it might have looked like, and not too far from the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, where we would have lots of grand horse races and other kinds of competitions. And we may have noted this before, but if you have seen the Hunger Games Catching Fire, it is this image, this arena, that is absolutely imitated in that film to give you some understanding of the connection between that concept of bread and circuses and our own modern day popular culture. So a great image of the ancient city of Rome, showing again the marvelous engineering capabilities of the Romans and their ability to really do urban living in an extravagant fashion. So who were these gladiators? Who were these people? They're named for the sword that they carried, the gladius. The gladius was a weapon that the Spanish had actually developed and the Romans adopted and adapted from the Spanish. This is a steel short sword. Most weaponry in antiquity at this time is iron. So this is a lighter sword. This is a stronger sword. It was the kind of sword that men in the army might have to use in hand-to-hand combat. This image that you have here is a replica of a gladius from Pompeii. About 22, 24 inches long. Again, lightweight, double-edged steel. Gladiators could be slaves, people who were captured in war and perhaps had some kind of potential for being a good arena fighter. Volunteers, people volunteered to be gladiators. People could become, if they became gladiators, they might wind up getting some kind of financial benefit. If they were slaves and they volunteered to be gladiators, they could actually win their freedom. Most gladiators had some kind of military training because this is military fare. We are trying to somehow represent military activity. And if you've seen, I hope, some of the BBC videos showing training, you'll see some of the reasons there why. You could get men and women competing in the gladiator contest. We actually have archaeological remains of female gladiators. They did indeed fight, women did. It's rare, but they were there. And we also know that extensive training went on. It was expensive to train gladiators. We have archaeological remains of the camps, the training centers and facilities, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. So gladiators, they could be slaves, you could volunteer to do it, you might be a former soldier who somehow winds up in this situation. They could be male or female, and they enjoyed, if enjoyed's the right word, significant training. Here is from the National Geographic. Up in Austria, of all places in the Roman Empire, we find the remains of a gladiator school. Here you have an aerial view of what it would look like. Here's the arena, the practice arena. Along the sides here you have barracks where people would be kept. The archaeologists on the site have suggested that the barracks are really more like cells, prison cells, and then some fortifications here. This would be a tower. Yeah. So you also get some close-up views of some of the walls here and barracks here, and then an artist rendering of what the whole compound might have looked like. Here's the arena. Here are just areas for living quarters, training, eating. And another indication of, again, a very creative restoration of what this facility might have looked like. Again, a very recent find just in the past couple of years. Also indicating that gladiator contest happened in many places. We have evidence in North Africa, we have evidence in Spain, Asia Minor, and here is Austria, so up in Germany, the Germanic territories as well. So very popular throughout the empire, not just in the city of Rome. We said earlier training costs could be significant. This is important to note because allowing a gladiator to fight to the death meant that a lot of money was at stake. Most of the times, gladiators did not fight to the death. That is sort of a myth associated perhaps with the Russell Crowe film. But gladiators don't fight to the death because they're way too expensive to do so. The training is extensive, and as you can see from this image, you've got different kinds of helmets being worn. I think you could see that from the gladiator film itself. You'll see not so much in this one, but different kinds of shields, not so much in this one, different kinds of weapons, but they trained with all kinds of weapons. This fellow here is the trainer. He has a nice long staff where he can get your attention if you're not doing what he wants you to do. This quote you have in your Hopkins essay, and it is a fictional account, but what it would be like to be a gladiator in the arena. And Quintilian, our source, is trying to imagine. He himself was a spectator. He was never a gladiator himself, but he tried to imagine what it would be like. And so the day arrived. Already the populace had gathered for the spectacle of our punishment, and the bodies about to die had their own death parade across the arena. The presenter of the show, who hoped to gain favor with our blood, took a seat. All around me, I could hear the instruments of death, a sword being sharpened, birch rods and whips were prepared. We also see gladiators showing up in art. I've been showing you this wonderful mosaic that indicates training, indicates the different weapons and such that gladiators might use. You also have figurines here to the left, images of gladiator helmets. These little figurines might be a child's toy. They might serve as decoration in a home for whatever purpose, but we have lots of images of gladiators in Roman popular culture and in art. What else would it be like to be a gladiator? What would it be like to be a spectator? In AD 80, first century AD, we find Trajan. I mentioned Trajan's column. We find Trajan is giving a spectacular set of games to celebrate his military victories and his coming of age, if you will, as emperor. He has tremendous success out in the empire, and he gives 100 days of games. At these games, our sources tell us some 5,000 to 9,000 animals could be killed in a single day. Individual and mass gladiatorial contests, so you could have individual pairs fighting, or you could have teams of gladiators going at each other. Mock combats, we would put on full-scale war, if you will, in the Colosseum, one side versus the other, the Romans versus the Carthaginians, the Greeks versus the Egyptians. It just depended on what the Romans wanted to show at the time. They could flood the arena with mock naval combat for mock naval battles. And Trajan did. Trajan put in a couple of feet of water in the bottom of the Colosseum, and then launched boats fighting each other. Huge, huge financial costs, as you might imagine, to have 100 days of such celebrations. So what would it be like to experience the arena? We already had Quintilian earlier talking about what it would be like as a combatant, as a participant, but what about being a spectator? You have in your Keith Hopkins article both the philosopher Seneca and the Christian philosopher and moralist St. Augustine talking about what this kind of brutal entertainment was like. Both men indicate that they come to understand why it was that people in the audience couldn't look away, got wrapped up in it. So both of them talk a lot about crowd psychology, crowd mentality, but they also talk about the spectacle of violence, the spectacle of bloodletting, and how it was very difficult to look away, how it was very easy to get caught up in it. Both were concerned about the effect it would have on society. So how do these relate to Roman identity? We had an earlier video, I hope that you've had a chance to look at, that talks a little bit about this as well. But Roman life was dangerous. Death was common. Hopkins talks about this. Death is very common. Life can be short. Life can be hard. Military campaigns are dangerous. They're costly in terms of lives. The Romans are famous for the extraordinary number of people they could field in battle. And because they had so many that they could field in battle, they could afford, if you will, significant casualties. And they took significant casualties. They lost many lives. The whole of the empire could be paraded in the arena. Again, we've said this before in another video, but whether it's prisoners of war or exotic animals, loot, prizes that you've won, these would be paraded through the streets of Rome and then paraded into the arena for everyone to see that Rome is fantastic. Look at the exotica that comes. Look at the people who are under our command. And here they are, here are examples. So the gladiatorial games and the mock combat staged in the arena taught lessons of history and of the expectations that Rome had. Hopkins and others will talk to you about how by the time we get to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, many of the people living in the city of Rome, Roman citizens in Rome, didn't fight their own battles anymore. They had other people to fight them for them. And the leadership of Rome needed to remind the people that war is harsh, war is difficult, but we have to maintain our military preparedness if we are going to continue to have the benefits of empire. So the gladiatorial games were meant to teach lessons of history, but also to teach about the expectations Rome had for her people. When we think about what it would be like to be in the crowd, you should know that the arenas were always full. The Colosseum could hold some 50,000 people, as I'm sure you know now by looking at some of the videos I have there for the Colosseum. That's not nearly enough people to satisfy the population of Rome. The population of Rome in the 1st century AD was a good million or more, maybe even 2 million. And to get into the arena, it could only hold about 50,000. This was a hot ticket. You wanted to go. The public seemed to demand entertainment. According to Juvenal, that's all they ever wanted. Now, I think he's exaggerating, but the title of this course inspired by Juvenal, saying that the people of Rome gave up all their responsibilities and all they wanted was bread and circuses. And the gladiator games, probably one of the grandest circuses that there were. So the public, we come to understand, demanded entertainment. They wanted this as a benefit of the great empire that they themselves or their ancestors had helped to create. These shows were very costly, as we've already said, and the emperor could strike back, I say. The emperor had to put up with the people because the people would come to the Colosseum and they might chant, as Hopkins tells you in his selection on political theater. They might chant things that they want. They might yell at the emperor, but the emperor in turn could turn to some of his guards and say, ooh, that section over there that's particularly rowdy, those first 2 rows, put them down in the arena, have them fight some lions. And so the emperor could pull the audience into the entertainment, if you will, in a very dramatic fashion. I also have here this idea of these Pompeii riots. The crowds could get pretty rowdy. Crowds would cheer for certain gladiators, cheer for certain gladiator teams. And sometimes the crowd got so worked up that they started fighting one another. And we see riots. This is not unusual in some respects at public venues today with sporting events. I'm reminded of some of the brawls that can break out at football or soccer games, particularly in England. This image, I don't know, it may take you a moment to get a handle on it, but here we have a Colosseum-like arena in Pompeii. If you've had the chance to go to Pompeii, and I hope you do, this arena is still there, and you can see it. And so here we have this arena. Here are steps going up to the entrance. It seems a little exaggerated, but here inside the arena are people fighting in mock combat, and there are people sitting in the stands. Folks supporting one side or the other got so rowdy that here they are now outside fighting one another. So the spectators took the fight outside. Yeah. A nice ancient form of graffiti from Pompeii. You have a selection on graffiti in this folder. I hope you will take the time to look at it. So Hopkins talks about political theater. In the imperial age, Roman citizens could interact with their leaders at such public spectacles. Previous to this, and Juvenal talks about it, previous to this 1st and 2nd centuries AD and these great spectacles, Roman citizens actually had more power in their government. They could express that power through voting. And when we get into the imperial age, the age of Augustus, of Tiberius, of Nero, and now Trajan, we find that one-man rule has come to dominate Rome, and that the people and their role in voting is less than it once was. But at the arenas, at these public events, as Hopkins will tell you, the people could shout down their emperors. They could demand certain things in a crowd where they would start to chant, right? So there could be some political elements here. Gladiators as heroes. We have lots of evidence coming from particularly the graffiti at Pompeii and other places that show that gladiators had a popular following, that they were very likely to draw large crowds, and that they somehow represented something heroic. The same here in modern day times. If you've seen the film Gladiator, a very fine film, not altogether historical, but that's all right, it's a film. And then of course the image to the left is of Spartacus. I believe that was, is that Stars? A production on cable television in the US. So we get this idea of the great fighting man who somehow has suffered some kind of injustice, right? Getting back to our Roman foundation stories, the great fighting man who has a sense of honor, a sense of duty, and in the gladiator stories have suffered some kind of injustice and is going to right that wrong through fighting, through violence. Ancient gladiators were seen as heroes, as we said before. Gladiators could win cash. They could win gold crowns that were literally gold. Yeah, very, very, very profitable thing to win. They could win their freedom. They had legions of fans who would support them at the games, come out for them. They inspired groupies. Again, we have graffiti from Pompeii. One in particular, this example, Calidus the Thracian. He is thrice victor, thrice crowned, the young girl's heartthrob. So that is an indication to us that women would attend the arena, right? And they would also have favorite gladiators. We have archaeological evidence that supports gladiators as heroes, gladiators in popular culture. We find baby bottles with gladiator images. fabulous. That's sort of like today when your child has his or her favorite superhero on anything to do, right, with childhood, whether it's Spider-Man diapers, which again my grandson has, or some kind of sippy cup that has Wonder Woman or some other kind of figure. Wonder Woman's dating me, but Dora the Explorer is a favorite in our household. So baby bottles in antiquity with gladiator images. Ah, and then, in a rather sad, I suppose, you know that at Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius erupted, and the eruption was so sudden, so fast, and it was all ash that people just suffocated from the ash, and they sort of fell where they were. We have found bodies of women wearing very expensive jewelry in the ashes of Pompeii, in the gladiator stalls of the arena at Pompeii. So, wealthy women visiting gladiators in their stalls before they were set to perform, sort of in their cells, if you will. So we have all of these images, we have this idea of the celebrity of gladiators, but we also need to look at the realities of what it meant to be a gladiator. And again, going back to our graffiti at Pompeii, which Hopkins relates to you, we have several memorials written on walls. Severus, ex-slave, 13 victories, killed. Albanus, once slave of Scaurus, freed, 19 victories, won. Spiculus of Nero's school, first fight, won. Aptinatus, ex-slave, 16 victories, killed. So little scorecards, should we call these? Memorials. And then we have a touching funerary marker, and it reads, "To the revered spirits of the dead, Glauco, born at Mutina, fought 7 times, died in the 8th. He lived 23 years, 5 days. Aurelia set this up to her well-deserving husband, together with those who loved him. Hail and farewell." I think this marker brings it home that the fellows, the women, the men who fought in the gladiator combats were just people who had families, who were loved, and for whom a funerary marker was an ordinary aspect of living and dying at Rome, even for gladiators. So what conclusions can we draw? Rome was a violent society. There's no doubt about it. Death was common. There was originally a religious component to these contests, celebrating life and death. I may have to leave it to you to figure out how that's religious, right? But something to do with human sacrifice, perhaps something to do with the athletic excellence of the human body, the heroic nature of Roman life, the violent nature, the militaristic nature. Other conclusions: Rome supported public entertainments. Many such events aimed at shaping Roman identity. Gladiators were slaves. They were lower in the social order than the spectators. So you know how that goes, right? That it's not me down there fighting. It's not me who's about to die. I'm here as a spectator, so somehow I am better than that guy. And so therefore somehow it's okay that he is going to entertain me with his own death. When we say aimed at shaping Roman identity, reminding the Romans of their past, reminding the Romans that that one must give up one's life for Rome, that one must sacrifice for Rome, and that sacrifice is going to be militaristic, it's going to be violent. Spectacles and competitions for public amusement reflect the violence inherent in creating and maintaining this empire. I've often wondered, and people ask me, why fights to the death? And again, I think we have fewer fights to the death than legend might maintain. But still, why kill these highly trained athletes for the amusement of the people? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Why fights that featured killing unarmed criminals and animals? These are people and animals, beings that are defenseless. It doesn't seem sporting in a way. It doesn't seem honorable in a way. Keith Hopkins suggests the social psychology of the crowd helps relieve the individual of responsibility in these kinds of issues. That same psychological mechanism can support spectators identifying more readily with the victory of the aggressor than the sufferings of the vanquished. Let's say that again. The same psychological mechanisms support spectators identifying more readily with the victory of the aggressor than the sufferings of the vanquished. There's a lot of life on the line in these contests, a lot of death on the line in these contests, and we would like to think that we too would survive such a struggle, so we identify more readily with the victory of the aggressor. Hopkins concludes that the popularity of the gladiatorial shows was the byproduct of war, discipline, and death. The Romans are a very disciplined society when it comes to doing their duty, living up to the honor expected of them to fight in war, and that death was all around. Can we draw some modern comparisons to this? We started off saying that many people make connections between Roman society and American society. Are mixed martial arts competitions something like gladiatorial contests? What about Ultimate Fighting Championships? UFC. So MMA and UFC, are they somehow putting great athletes to the test who in these combats rarely die, but on occasion do? And do we as spectators want to see our fellow human beings somehow brought to the brink of consciousness, brought to the brink of some kind of dangerous fighting? I've not myself been to this great arena down in Arlington with Dallas Cowboy Stadium, but it is a wonder. It is amazing how many people you can get in there and how loud it can get, all for the sake of football and, of course, other entertainments as well. NASCAR, basketball, football. What is it that, why do we like these? Why do we like to turn out in large numbers to see these contests that oftentimes pit very courageous, strong people against each other, and oftentimes end up with people getting hurt very seriously? And then popular culture. Again, if you've read the Hunger Games books, if you've seen the films, it is rather extraordinary to me that these books about a dystopia, a dysfunctional society, where we exploit young people for their entertainment value in order to hold the state together. It's extraordinary to me that this story, this idea that sort of mocks the whole concept of gladiatorial contests, mocks the idea of bread and circuses, has become, for our culture, one of the most popular, one of the most lucrative film franchises in the history of the US. So you have a discussion board assignment. Is there a modern equivalent to the gladiatorial games? Can you think of one? If you can, what is it? If you cannot, why not? The Romans seem to find value in a culture of violence. They seem to associate this culture of violence with their success. What lessons can be learned from this? Please address both questions and respond to at least 2 of your colleagues' posts by the end of week 2.